January 10th, 2025, online with the VIHE, reading from Śrīmad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 7, texts 1 through 22. Srinarda Uvacha Evam Daitya Sutai Prishto Maha Bhagavato Sura Uvacha Tan Smayamanaha Smaran Mad Anubashitam. Although Prahlad Maharaj was born in a family of asuras, he was the greatest of all devotees. Narada Muni said, although Prahlad Maharaj was born in a family of asuras, he was the greatest of all devotees. Having thus been questioned by his class friends, the sons of the asuras, he remembered the words spoken to him by me and replied to his friends as follows. It's interesting that in the Sanskrit it says hasitam, smiling, but Prabhupada doesn't put that in the samayana, and rather smiling, and Prabhupada doesn't put it in the translation. We have this kind of thing that sometimes there's this, actually a lot. There's a misconnect between the word for word, the translation, and the purport. Something I've noted. Shri Parada Uvacha Pitari Prastite Shmakam Tapase Mandara Chalam Yudo Dhyamam Param Chakrur Vibhuda Danavam Prati. Prahlad Maharaj said, when our father Hiranyakashipu went to Mandarachala mountain to execute severe austerities, in his absence the demigods headed by King Indra made a severe attempt to subdue all the demons in warfare. Pipilikar ahir iva disya loka padapana papena papabakshiti vadanto vyasavadaya. Alas, as a serpent is eaten by small ants, so the troublesome Hiranyakashipu, who always inflicted miseries upon all types of people, has now been defeated by the reactions of his own sinful activities. Saying this, the demigods headed by King Indra arranged to fight the demons. Tesham ati balodhyogam nisham yasurayutapaha vajyamana surabhita Dudruvu sarvato disham kalatra putra vitaptan griham pashu parichadan navekshyamanastvaritaha sarve prana parisavaha. When the great leaders of the demons, who were being killed one after another, saw the unprecedented exertion of the demigods in fighting, they began to flee, scattering themselves in all directions. Simply to protect their lives, they hastily fled from their homes, wives, children, animals, and household paraphernalia. Paying no heed to all of these, the demons simply fled. Vyalupam Raja Shibiram Amara Jaya Kankshinaha Indrastu Rajamahi Singh Mataram Mamachagrahit. The victorious demigods plundered the palace of Hiranyakashipu, the king of the demons, and destroyed everything within it. Then Indra, king of heaven, arrested my mother, the queen. Nityamanam Bayodvignan Rudatim Kururim Iva Yadricha Yagatastatra Devashir Dadrishe Pati. As she was being led away, crying in fear like a Kurari bird captured by a vulture, the great sage Narada, who at that time had no engagement, appeared on the scene and saw her in that condition. Had no engagement. So we have the Yadrichaya. Ichaya means by his own desire, by just because he wanted to. He's something, like in full freedom. He didn't have to, he just wanted to. Nothing, he didn't have any obligation. Prahanainam sutrapate netram arhas yanagasam muncha mahabhaga satim para parigraham. Narada Muni said, "O Indra, king of the demigods, this woman is certainly sinless. You should not drag her off in this merciless way. O greatly fortunate one, this chaste woman is the wife of another. You must immediately release her." So I believe Hindi is also like that when they want emphasis, they repeat the word, muncha, muncha, release, release. Whereas in English, we say very, or Prabhupada's adding immediately for emphasis. Shri Indra Uvacha Aste Sya Jatare Viryan Avisayam Sura Dvishaha Asyatam Yava Prasavam Mokshe Ritam Padavim Gataha. King Indra said, in the womb of this woman, the wife of the demon Hiranyakashipu, is the seed of that great demon. Therefore, let her remain in our custody until her child is delivered, and then we shall release her. Shri Narada Uvacha Ayam Niskil Bisha Sakshan Maha Bhagavato Mahan Twayana Prapstyate Samstam Antan Ucharo Bali. Narada Muni replied, the child within this woman's womb is faultless and sinless. Indeed, he is a great devotee, a powerful servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, you will not be able to kill him. Ityuktastam vahayendro devasher manayam vachaha ananta priya bhaktyanyam parikramaya dviyam yayo. When the great sage Narada Muni had thus spoken, King Indra, being respectful to Narada's words, immediately released my mother. Because of my being a devotee of the Lord, all the demigods circumambulated her. Then they returned to their celestial kingdom. Tatome mataram rishi samaniya nijashrame asvasyeno syatam vatse yavate bhartir agamaha. Prahlad Maharaj continued, the great sage Narada Muni brought my mother to his ashram and assured her of all protection, saying, my dear child, please remain at my ashram until the arrival of your husband. And we'll notice in the Sanskrit we have vatse. Again, vatsa literally means a calf, a baby cow. And again, in English, our term of endearment for a human child is a baby goat, a kid. And remember, this is how Hiranyakashipu had addressed Prahlad as vatse. And here Narada Muni is addressing a woman, a grown adult woman, as like my dear kid. Hey, my dear kid. Tat yet vavatsedevarsher antike sakuto baya yava daitya patir gorat tapaso na navartata. After accepting the instructions of Devarshi Narada, my mother stayed in his care without fear from any direction, as long as my father, the king of the Daitas, had not become free from his severe austerities. Rishing Paryat Charatatra Bhaktya Paramaya Sati Antarvatni Swagarbhasya Kshemaye Cha Prasutaye. My mother, being pregnant, desired the safety of her embryo and desired to give birth after her husband's arrival. Thus she stayed at Narada Muni's ashram, where she rendered service unto Narada Muni with great devotion. Here we see in this verse a very common way of talking about women with the word sati, someone who's faithful, someone who's chaste. So this is a common term. Instead of just nari, which means woman, we have sometimes these other terms being used. Rishi Karunikastasyaha Pradad Ubayam Ishvaraha Dharmasya Tattvam Jnana Cha Mam Ap Yud Ishya Nirmalam. Narada Muni delivered his instructions both to me, who was within the womb, and to my mother, who was engaged in rendering him service. Because he is naturally extremely kind to the fallen souls, being in a transcendental position, he gave instructions on religion and transcendental knowledge. These instructions were free from all material contamination. So we have this word nirmala that doesn't have any mala. It doesn't have any, not a garland. Mala here means something dirty. Mala in Ayurveda means like excrement. So this dharma and tattva and jnanam were not of the material world. They had no, they were not related to the kind of dharma that Shanda and Amarka were teaching. Tattu kalasya digadvat shritvan matus tiro dade rishnam urgrihitamam rish an ugrihitamam nad unapya. What's wrong with me today? Nad unyapya. I'll try again. Urmila. Nahun up ya jahat smritihi. Because of the long duration of time that has passed, and because of her being a woman, and therefore less intelligent, my mother has forgotten all those instructions, but the great sage Narada blessed me, and therefore I could not forget them. Bhagavatam api bhuyan me yadi shraddha hate vachaha vaish ardadi dishradhata Sri Balanam Chameyata. Prahlad Maharaj continued, my dear friends, if you can place your faith in my words, simply by that faith, you can also understand transcendental knowledge, just like me, although you are small children. Similarly, a woman can also understand transcendental knowledge and know what is spirit and what is matter. So first he says she forgot, right, because of time and because she's Sri, because she's a woman, but then he says a woman can understand. So we'll look at that, of course, more later. Janma jyasad ime bhava dristya dehasyanatmanaha palanam eva vrikshasya kalaneshvara murtina. Just as the fruits and flowers of a tree in due course of time undergo 6 changes, birth, existence, growth, transformation, dwindling, and then death, the material body, which is obtained by the spirit soul under different circumstances, undergoes similar changes. However, there are no such changes for the spirit soul. So here he's returning to giving the teachings, switched from the history to the teachings. Atma nityo vyayashudha ekakshetragnya ashraya avikriya swadighetur vyapako sangyanavrittaha etar dwada shabir vidvan atmano lakshanai parai ahamam echasad bhavam dehado mohajam twajit. Atma refers to the Supreme Lord or the living entities. Both of them are spiritual, free from birth and death, free from deterioration, free from material contamination. They are individual. They are knowers of the external body, and they are the foundation or shelter of everything. They are free from material change. They are self-illuminated. They are the cause of all causes, and they are all-pervading. They have nothing to do with the material body, and therefore they are always uncovered. With these transcendental qualities, one who is actually learned must give up the illusory conception of life in which one thinks, I am this material body, and everything in relationship with this body is mine. Swarnam yatagra vatstu makaraha kshetreshu yogaishtad abhigna apnunyat kshetreshu deheshu yatatma yogair adhyatma vid brahma gatim ladheta. An expert geologist can understand where there is gold, and by various processes can extract it from gold ore. Similarly, a spiritually advanced person can understand how the spiritual particle exists within the body, and thus by cultivating spiritual knowledge, he can attain perfection in spiritual life. However, as one who is not expert cannot understand where there is gold, a foolish person who has not achieved spiritual knowledge cannot understand how the spirit exists within the body. Ashtoprakritaya proktas traya eva hitad gunaha vikara sodayascharai pumam eka samanvayat. The Lord's 8 separated material energies, the 3 modes of material nature, and the 16 transformation, in other words, the 11 senses and the 5 gross material elements like earth and water, Within all these, the one spiritual soul exists as the observer. Therefore, all the great acharyas have concluded that the individual soul is conditioned by these material elements. And you notice the word observer is not in the Sanskrit. All right, so summary of this section, 771 to 22, is that Prahlad explains the circumstances that led to his receiving spiritual instructions from Narada. So he's answering the classmates' questions of how could you have heard this from Narada? And then he explains some of the nature of the soul and the difference between the soul and matter. So our basic questions that can be answered here are, how do we get spiritual knowledge, and who are we not? So our themes in this section are: our ability to gain spiritual knowledge is dependent on our sincere attention and the mercy of great souls, not on material situations. So sincere attention and mercy of great souls, and not our material situation. And our first spiritual lesson, our first spiritual need, is to learn to identify with the soul rather than the changing world. All right, in verses 1 through 17, we have the events leading to Kayadu's stay at Narada's ashram. And in verses 1 through 8, we have that when Hiranyakashipu was doing austerities, the Devas attacked the demons and arrested Kayadu. Okay, verse 1, it's explained that devotional service is ahoituki apritiyata. It can be done in any material situation. This is again kind of reflecting back to Bhagavatam 2.936, that devotional service can be done in the womb. In fact, the example is given by one of our acharyas in that commentary to that verse, that Prahlad did devotional service in the womb. So in childhood and anywhere. And in verses 2 to 5, we really want to note this metaphor given by Indra. He says, a snake can be defeated by ants. And defeated by his own sins. So Indra is saying Hiranyakashipu, who couldn't be defeated by anyone, has been defeated by his own sins. Of course, Indra is saying this when Hiranyakashipu is out performing austerities, by which he's going to become extremely powerful, much more powerful than he was before he did his austerities. In verse 6, we note that the Devas defeat the demons, and then they steal the wealth of their defeated enemies. So this taking of booty, this taking of plunder, was one traditional way in which governments got wealth. So they got wealth through taxation, through fines and fees, but they also got wealth if they defeated enemies in battle. They could plunder their riches. I mean, in this case, they were plundering the riches like inside the palace. Many times these soldiers would go to battle with riches. Like, we were just recently in another class reading in the Bhagavatam how when Arjuna was given a chariot by Agni, the chariot was covered with pearls. And they'd wear, helmets made out of precious metals, and they'd have real rubies and diamonds and sapphires in their armor and so forth. Now, it's interesting in verse 7 that Narada Muni just kind of appears when Kayadu is being led away. There he is. They're leading, oh, where'd you come from? And Narada Muni can do that. He can just appear someplace, right? And yeah, and it says he appears by his own desires. Yes. And in text 8, Narada says the woman is sinless. You're not allowed to arrest somebody who's committed no crime. Her husband is sinful, but she's not sinful. Often in the world, it often happens that family members of a criminal are hated. If the if the husband committed a crime, then the wife and the children are often considered to be contaminated in some way by his crime, even if they had nothing to do with it and didn't know anything about it. So text 9 through 11 is where Narada stops the Devas and tells them the child would be a great devotee. So in text 9, Indra indicates that he plans to kill the child after birth. He doesn't say that, but that's the implication. This child is sinful. We're going to keep the mother until she gives birth, and then we'll release her. In other words, we're not holding her because there's anything wrong with her. We're holding her because we know there's something going to be wrong with her child. And in text 10, Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that there's a declaration by the Supreme Personality of Godhead that his devotee cannot be killed by demons. We'll talk about that in our second half, but it's certainly something to think about. Do devotees ever get killed by demons? Definitely in warfare. So that's definitely true in warfare, that when devotees go into battle with demons, some of them get killed by demons. We talked about this in another class. Vitrasura, of course, got killed not by a demon, he got killed by Indra, but he went out to battle. Abhimanyu, who got killed by the Kauravas, Jatayu, who got killed by Ravana. So definitely when devotees go into battle, they can get killed by demons. In other circumstances, hard to say. Okay, in text 11, the Devas accept Narada as an authority, even though they can't see for themselves the truth. That he says, this child's a great devotee. They don't know that. In fact, they thought the child was a demon. But when Narada says that, they accept it. And Srila Prabhupada writes about the parampara system, that first we accept and then we try to understand. However, we only accept the parampara system because we've already done some testing. And there's this kind of circle going on here. So a number of times I'll hear Srila Prabhupada say that, don't accept a guru that you're going to argue with. That if you're not willing to accept what the guru says, you shouldn't accept that guru. At the same time, we're supposed to ask questions, prashnena. And we were talking yesterday about how the boys asked Prahlad, how did you learn this from Narada when you've never left the palace? And how Arjuna asked Krishna, how did you teach this to the sun god when, we're not old enough for you to have met that sun god? And Arjuna also argues with other things. I mean, Arjuna says, I think the system of yoga you're instructing me in is impractical. He says, you're giving me contradictory instructions. You're telling me not to do abominable activities, and you're telling me to fight. So it's not that the disciple doesn't question the guru, even like that, we could say, arguing after accepting the guru. But one is supposed to test a guru for at least a year before accepting that guru. So Prabhupada says, unless we've surrendered, we won't get benefit out of asking questions. I mean, this is a practical matter. Even in very ordinary, mundane things, if I'm lost and I stop, and we do this less and less now with GPS, but, if I'm lost and I stop and ask somebody for directions, if I don't have faith that they're going to give me valid directions, I won't get any benefit from my asking the question. Right? I mean, when I was teaching children, sometimes the kids would come up to my desk with a question, and sometimes the question was a very challenging question, and I would ask them, do you want to argue or do you want to learn? What do you want to do? If you want to argue, there's no point in my continuing. But if you're open to learning. So when we're testing the guru before taking shelter of a guru, we should certainly be not exactly arguing, but we should see, is what the guru is saying, is this confirmed by sadhu and shastra? We should see, is the guru actually able to, do they have some realization? Stotriyam Brahmanishtam, that they should have heard from the disciplic succession and they should themselves be fixed in spiritual life. So that was the idea. And during that time, one is not just examining silently, but one can certainly be asking questions. Prabhupada answered questions of people who were not his disciples at all. At the same time, unless one is open to hearing the answer, there's no point in asking the question. So you can ask a question to see whether or not a person is worthy of listening to. But even then, unless you're willing to accept the answer, there's no use even in asking that question. I had someone not very long ago give me a link to an article and ask my opinion about it. And I thought the person, who's a friend of mine, and I thought the person was genuinely asking for my opinion and that the person didn't have any preconceived attachments and notions about it. And I gave an opinion very quickly. It was a long article. It was 17 pages long. And within just reading the first page, I could understand that the article was rubbish. It was complete rubbish. And in retrospect, it would have been better had I waited a day, even if I wasn't going to read the whole thing, because the person responded a lot to the fact that I had answered so quickly. They felt I hadn't taken the time to really evaluate what they had sent me, and therefore they felt personally disrespected. This was not clear to me until a day or two later. But when I said this is not accurate, then the person became upset with me. And I said, well, if you asked me, you must have understood before you asked me that I had the credentials to evaluate it. And what I didn't say, but what I was thinking is, if you asked me, you must have felt that your credentials were insufficient to evaluate it. And then, if you ask me a question because you think that I have some knowledge and experience in this matter, and therefore I know what I'm talking about, and then you tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, then one wonders, well, why did you ask me at all in the first place? So there's this, when we're asking an authority to evaluate that authority, we still have to be respectful. Questions without respect are useless. So here the Devas, they accept Narada as an authority, and they're willing to release her just based on that. Okay, in text 12 to 17, so Narada brings Kayadu to his ashram, and he speaks transcendental knowledge to her and to the child in his womb. So we note in text 12 that Narada calls Kayadu Vatse, meaning dear child, and assures her of protection. So this is quite interesting. Srila Prabhupada likes to quote Chanika Pandit that men should call women other than their wife, and it has to be other than their possible wife as well, mother, with the idea that doing that, he's indicating that there's no possibility of sexual interest in talking to her, because the least sexual relationship is between a mother and son, that's the relationship that's least likely to be sexual. So when a man says to a woman, mother, then the idea is that he's saying, I do not have any sexual interest in you. And it seems to me, it's not stated anywhere, but it seems to me that something similar is going on here with calling her child. That although she's a grown woman, she's married to Hiranyakashipu, she's pregnant, Narada is calling her a child, that he's taking a parental role. So instead of taking a child role and saying, my dear mother, which he could, instead he's saying, my dear child. But it's indicating the same kind of thing, that, I'm not going to exploit you. And he assures her of protection. So that's particularly relevant when you're calling someone a child. And sometimes we people who are older may talk to someone younger than us and call them kid or kiddo. Generally, people will be insulted by something like that. So if I talk to someone who's the age of my children, who are now middle-aged, if I talk to people in their 40s or 50, and I say, oh, hey, kiddo, they're gonna be offended. They're going to think that I'm saying that they're childish. But I do sometimes do that with some of my former students. In 13, it mentions that Kayadu serves Narada without fear. So without fear of what? Without fear of whom? Certainly without fear of the demigods, who she was definitely afraid of, but also without fear from him. And there's this question I've read going around that asking women that if you were alone in a wooded area and you see a bear or you see a man, which is more scary to you? And a lot of the women say the man. So she's not afraid of Narada either. She's not afraid that he's going to exploit her, and she's feeling that she already saw that he protected her from the demigods. In 14, Prabhupada talks about how Narada is above ordinary rules and is not affected by close proximity with a woman like Haridas Thakur. I mean, Haridas Thakur's case was even more extreme. So it's quite a different situation because he's just alone in his place meditating, and this woman shows up there. I mean, Narada went to get the woman and bring her to his place, whereas with Haridas Thakur, the woman comes to his place. And with Narada Muni, the woman he's protecting is the pregnant wife of someone else who he's protecting from the devas. Whereas in Haridas Thakur's case, it's a young prostitute who's come there specifically to seduce him. So the situation's quite different, and the situation with Haridas and the prostitute is much more irregular and risky, but Haridas is not affected. Not only is he not affected, but he doesn't leave. He doesn't say, oh, there's this prostitute coming into my, whatever it was. I don't know if at that time he was in a cave or he was in a hut or he was outside, but coming, it's just me and her, and I got to get out of here. Generally, that's what we're going to do. Generally, if we're in some private space and some member of the opposite sex comes that is not in a proper family relationship with us, we leave that space. We don't stay in that space. But Haridas doesn't leave. He stays and chants until she surrenders. And later this happens with Maya Devi herself, who comes to test him. So in the same case, the woman comes to him and she's specifically trying to seduce him, and he doesn't leave the area, rather he purifies her. So that's, I would say, an even a much more extreme situation than Narada's situation. Also, it's not clear whether or not Narada is this just his private ashram? Is he just there alone? Many times saints have an ashram with other saintly persons. Are there other saintly persons around? It's not clear. But evidently Narada is still his relationship with this woman. She's serving him. She's there serving him. Prabhupada specifically says a renunciate should be careful about taking service from women. But he's not affected by this situation. Okay, 15, the Dharma and knowledge, we mentioned this when we were reading the verse, taught by Narada are nirmalam, they're spotless or transcendental. They're not the same as the kind of Dharma taught by Shanda and Amarka. In text 16, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says the classmates wondered why Kayadu didn't remember these instructions. So when Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says these kind of things, sometimes he actually adds dialogue. In other words, it could be that the other children actually said to Prahlad, hey, Narada taught both of you, why do you remember not your mother? And therefore Prahlad spoke this verse. And then Srila Prabhupada in the purport distinguishes women from Papayoni, which is interesting because the verse in the Bhagavad Gita about Papayoni, sometimes Prabhupada considers that women are Papayoni, and sometimes he considers that it's a series of categories, and Papayoni, which means sinful birth, is a separate category. Prabhupada also talks about women in the purport, and he adds the word less intelligent into the translation. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments on this verse that I obtained the mercy of Narada because she did not obtain his mercy. The influence of time and her being a woman were stronger. So you could say that an unborn child is much more vulnerable to forget than a grown woman. And the influence of time was there for both Prahlad and his mother. But the main difference was that Prahlad got the mercy of Narada and Kayadu did not. And text 17, we can understand through the disciplic succession and the mercy of a devotee such as Prahlad. So then Prahlad basically is finished with the history of how he received this instruction. And if we're very skeptical that a fetus can learn and remember, you're welcome to do some research on this, but even at the present time, there's a lot of evidence that an unborn child can hear, and that unborn children recognize their mother's voice. As soon as they're born, they recognize their mother's voice. They'll recognize the voice also of their father, any other adults that they regularly heard, and that things that the mother hears during pregnancy can actually be learned by the child. There was one family I'm aware of where they read advanced mathematics textbooks out loud when the mother was pregnant, and the children were skilled in mathematics by the time they were like a year old. Another family where they did this with chess. I think they had 3 daughters, and all of them became incredibly expert at chess, but they started during the mother's pregnancy reading out loud. So there's even instances today about children who, after birth, demonstrate that they learn things in the womb. Okay, 18 through 22, Prahlad is returning back to his instructions to his classmates, so he stopped his history. And here he's talking about the nature of the spirit soul. And he already gave some instructions, of course, in the previous chapter. So in text 18, he says, the body undergoes changes, but the soul is unchanging. Important. If we have, and I know I've mentioned this several times, but it's kind of something that's relatively current, that we have some people in our Gaudiya society who want to say that the soul is potentially an individual, but there's no inherent bhakti, there's no inherent love, there's no inherent personality in the soul. But the Shastra consistently describes the soul as changeless. So one's personality, one's love, one's bhakti could be covered, but the nature of the soul itself doesn't change. Perfection is not adding something that changes the nature of the soul. Then the Lord is also unchanging. So just like in our body, we undergo these 6 changes, and the universal body also is having all these millenniums of creation, Prabhupada says, but still the Lord doesn't change. I find it interesting that Prabhupada compares the soul to a tree, and the changes in the body to the changing fruits and leaves of the tree. So sometimes when people try to get detached from their mundane identity, they'll meditate on like a tree, that I'm like a tree standing outside and the weather is changing. Sometimes it's like right now where I am, it's extremely cold and we're about to get a severe storm today. And then other times at other parts of the year, it's very hot and the sun is shining and so forth. And so these changes are happening around the tree, but the tree stays the tree. And in the winter, in this kind of climate, at least, the tree goes dormant, the deciduous trees goes dormant, their leaves fall down, and then in the spring, the leaves come back up and so forth. But the tree remains the tree. So there's changes happening in the body of the tree, and there's changes happening around the tree, but the tree itself has the same identity. In 19 through 20, we learn that the soul has all the qualities of God, and that we can understand God by understanding the soul. This is a point Prabhupada makes a lot, that you can understand the chemical composition of the ocean by analyzing one drop of ocean water. Prabhupada talks about in the pastime of Krishna and Jambavad that the Lord has all the proclivities of any living entity. So we can understand something about God by understanding ourselves. Now, people will object that this is anthropomorphism, that we're projecting onto God. We're projecting human characteristics onto God, but that is not a fact. Anthropomorphism is when I think that, because I'm limited and fallible, that God is also limited and fallible. But the fact that I'm a person, that I have desires, that I have activities, that I have pleasures, this also exists in God. And that both the soul and God are individuals. And Prabhupada mentions that someone who thinks that they're equal to God, then they can understand Krishna after many, many births. So he's referring to Bahunam Janmanam Ante Gyanavamam Prapajante Vasudevam Sarvamiti Samahatma Sadurlabha. So to identify with the body is dark ignorance. And of course, pretty much all the non-humans, all the lower than humans are doing this. And here at the present time in 2025, I would guess that the majority of humans on this planet are doing this too. On this planet are thinking, I am this body. So there are 12 qualities mentioned here of the Atma, and Atma can be understood either as a soul or as God, can be understood as a soul or the super soul. First is eternal without birth and death, or Nitya. Second, free from deterioration, Avyaya. The third, pure without material contamination, Shuddha. In other words, the material contamination does not touch us. It's like if you took a jewel and it fell into, a sewer, all of that would be outside it. The jewel, diamond's not porous, it's not going to contaminate it. Individual, Eka, knower of the body, Kshetragya, shelter of everything, Ashraya, free from material change, Avikriya, self-illuminated, Swadrik. That's cool, huh? We're all self-illuminated. Cause of all causes, Hetu, which is certainly something very interesting, all pervading or spreading throughout the body as consciousness, Vyapaka, independent of the material body, Asangi, always uncovered, Anavritaha. So our sense of being covered is an illusion. In verse 21, Prahlad says you have to have some expertise to find the soul, just like a geologist has to become expert to find gold in stone. If you're not expert, you're walking over a bunch of gold, you don't even know it's there. 22, one must realize that one is the soul, the observer of the gross elements, the modes of nature, the 11 senses, and their objects. This is a theme that I repeat a lot in my classes, because I found that having this consciousness, having this as part of our sadhana is very important, and not having it has severe consequences. But I found that a lot of the preachers in our movement somehow don't talk about this very much, although it's all over our scripture. So I tend to kind of emphasize it myself. That I, the soul, am the observer. I'm observing the gross elements. I'm observing the modes of nature. I'm observing the senses. I'm observing the objects of the senses. Okay, we have a whole lot of really interesting points in this section. So Narada Muni is speaking to Maharaj Yudhisthira. So Narada is telling the story of how Prahlad is telling the story of Narada. So Prahlad is quoting Narada. Narada is quoting Prahlad, quoting Narada. And then, of course, Sukadev is quoting Narada, quoting Prahlad, quoting Narada. And Sutta is quoting Sukadev, quoting Narada, quoting Prahlad, quoting Narada. Another thing that's really interesting in text 5 is how these demons are so afraid for their lives. Okay, we get that they run away from their houses, but they run away from their wives and children. Sheesh. I mean, even materialistic people don't usually do that. I mean, even materialistic people, if there's some danger, they usually grab their family members. Remember, we were talking about how people glorify family attachment, and how family attachment in and of itself is not spiritual. But wow, these guys could use a little bit more family attachment. They're so selfish that they're just not even taking care of their family. Goodness. And in text 1 through 8, it seems that when Hiranyakashipu went to perform austerities, nobody was taking care of the kingdom. It was kind of neglected. It was up for grabs. It's interesting in text 8 that Indra doesn't consider abortion of Prahlad. So he's going to wait till the child's born and do infanticide, which is, of course, not stated directly, but implied. Now, later on in history, And we know it's later on in history because it's after the death of Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. Indra does try to perform an abortion on his aunt and stepmother, Diti, who is pregnant with a child specifically meant to kill Indra. So I taught that section in the VIHE as part of the Bhakti Vaibhava classes. So anyway, Indra was willing to do an abortion later, but not this time. It's interesting that Indra assumes that the child of a demon will be a demon. He just makes that assumption. Okay, and we already talked about how Narada addresses Kayadu as Vatse. Just a little note that there's a great variety of ways in the Bhagavatam that women are addressed. There is not simply one way of addressing women, and women are very, very, very rarely addressed as mother in the Shastra unless they're actually the mother of the person who's talking to them. So the one devotee some years ago did a whole research project on all the different ways that women are addressed. Women are addressed directly, or that women are addressed in the third person. Like here we have the word sati is being used to talk about Kayadu in the third person, and vatse is being used to address a woman directly. Okay, we mentioned we don't know whether or not Narada is alone in his ashram with Kayadu, and that he's an exception. It's also interesting that Narada was cursed by Daksha, that he couldn't have any residence, and yet he seems to have a residence. So maybe that curse occurred later chronologically than this. I suppose that's possible. The 6 changes of the body in 18 are birth, maintenance, growth, transformation, declining, and death. I mentioned that the word observer is not in the Sanskrit for text 22. In 21 purport, Prabhupada writes, as an expert mineralogist or geologist can understand where there is gold and can then invest his money to dig there and chemically separate the gold from the ore, an expert spiritualist can understand where the soul is within matter. One who has not been trained cannot distinguish between gold and stone. Similarly, fools and rascals who have not learned from an expert spiritual master what is soul and what is matter cannot understand the existence of the soul within the body, that we need some spiritual expertise. Okay, we're ready for a break. Be back in 11 minutes. Take a real break. Take a break from your screen and take a break from sitting down. So no, I can't repeat anything right now. We're going to take a break. So stop looking at your screen and stop sitting down. Give a break to your eyes and give a break to your body. So I'd like each of you to briefly explain the last thing we talked about the gold, or last thing Prahlad Maharaj talked about the gold. I'd like everyone to answer this in the chat. Briefly explain. If someone said to you, what was Prahlad's point about the gold? What would your answer be? Just not more than 3 sentences. And everyone, please do this in the chat. Excellent, Prasant. Yes, Ajay, you really got the essence of it. Sri Radha Govinda, no. Sorry. Please go back to text 22 and look again. Great answer, but not right. Unusual for you. Generally, you're spot on with everything. So please check it out again. Excellent, Asit Prabhu. Neelamani, excellent. Do we have everybody? I think there's some people that we haven't heard from. Everybody, please write something. Give you another few seconds. Yes. Yes, Advaita Krishna Prabhu. Okay. So one of the most essential things to realize is that we're the observer, to separate our understanding of myself. Who am I? That I, the real self, am the observer. And I want to note again that I find, although this instruction is all over the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, that, yes, Shaktimanta, that somehow we don't seem to emphasize it as much as we could. I find this message is more emphasized by like Gyanis and yogis. So I want to note here that this advice is being given to children. It's been given to 5-year-old children. It's advice that Krishna gives in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and yet I find so many members of our Hare Krishna movement that think that this kind of advice is just that this behavior is just the result of great spiritual advancement rather than a sadhana that all of us are capable of doing. All right, I'd like your thoughts, anyone who wants to raise their hand, on how could we practice this? How could we practically live like this? Some people here who've never said anything. Surita Gaur Prabhu, what's your thoughts on this?
Hare Krishna Madhidam Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
I'm not clear on this.
What are you unclear about?
I would have to read
What about my question could I clarify for you?
Actually, the question is going above my head.
Okay, well, what could I clarify for you? Because this was an instruction given to little children, so I'm confident that we can understand it. So I must be explaining it wrongly if you're not understanding it. So what about it could I explain better?
Yes, please.
Okay, but I'm not sure what about it you don't understand. So Prahlad Maharaj is telling us that we should realize that I, the soul, am the observer of my body. I'm the observer of the modes of nature. I'm the observer of the senses. And he's giving this as a sadhana. He's giving this as a practice. How specifically could we practice this, Sarita Gaur? What could you do specifically in your life to practice this?
For this, we need to intensify our sadhana, and we need to associate with the right-minded devotees or the highly elevated who can really, whose mood we can absorb.
Okay. So that's kind of a generic answer, but we can associate with other people who are doing it. But what specific thing would you do? What specific thoughts and feelings and behaviors could you do, Surita Gaur Prabhu, so that you could have this awareness that I am the observer of these things? Okay, Sri Radha Govinda and Mittu Lakshmi both gave answers, but you're still not telling me what's the process is. Oh, Murari. Okay, Aja, you've got something here. Are pains and pleasures experienced by the soul, or are they just at the mind level? That's a question one could ask. I'm going to call on someone else because some of you like never say anything. Abhirupa Malati, what's your thoughts? Prema Manjari is giving some practical sadhana. Abhirupa Malati, what's your thoughts? What can we practically do so that we'll be aware that I'm the observer of the mind, the senses, and the modes?
One can practice devotional service, fix his mind on the Lord, so that our intelligence gets purified, and then intelligence gets inspiration from the super soul who is situated in the core of everyone's heart. So then we can realize Lord.
Okay, well, that's a general answer that could be the answer to practically any question that I asked. Almost any question I asked about Krishna consciousness, you could have given that as an answer, and it's a correct answer. But I'd like to ask you very specifically, how do you distinguish yourself from your mind? How do you do that? Abhirupa Malati, how do you distinguish yourself from your mind?
Yes, Mataji, I am trying to find this thing, as I am always asked this question from everyone. How can I distinguish my mind with the self?
And you've never been able to do that?
Yeah.
So you keep identifying with you. Do you always identify with your mind?
Mind is our subtle body. We
Yes.
are not identifying
Are
our
you personally always identifying with your mind, or do you have some situation where you're able to not identify with your mind?
I am always identifying myself with the mind, but
Oh, goodness. All right, well, let's see if somebody else here has some sadhana that they can use. Let's see, someone else who hasn't said practically anything. Ramananda Krishna, how do you separate yourself from your mind or yourself from the modes? What do you do?
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dhanam Pranam. Yes, Mataji, like regarding this, Prabhupada giving a wonderful analogy. Like we say, like Prabhupada gives an example, this is finger. So we say, this is my finger. We never say, I am this finger. So similarly, we say, okay, this is my mind. We never say that I am this mind. And we say, this is my body, but we never say that I means my body, like this. So in this way, we can separate this body, senses, and the self.
Okay, good. You're the first person who's actually given me some kind of technique. And can you make that a little specific? So in what specific situation, how would you do that with your mind, for example?
Like regarding Prabhupada giving one example, like little finger, how many ways we can give to pain to this finger? So like there are many ways, but then next question asks how many ways we can give pleasure to this finger. So there is no ways by which we can give pleasure to
I
this
think
finger.
that's an example just from Bhakti True Swami, not from Srila Prabhupada, but it's a very nice example. But I still would like to know, in your practical life, in your daily life, how do you distinguish you, the self, from the body, or you yourself from the mind? Or the modes? How do you tell the difference? What do you do? How do you know this thing that's happening right now is just the modes, or this thing that's happening right now is just the body, or this thing that's happening right now is just the mind? How do you do that? Can you give me one example of how you do that in your practical life? You're talking about your finger and you're talking about pains and pleasures of your finger. So how do you do that in your life?
Yes, Mataji, maximum time we have identified ourselves as a body only. We have never identified as a soul. However, we say that I am the soul, but practically we have never realized this.
Never. Oh my goodness. I have other things I have to cover in this class, but this seems like it's rather important. Okay, who else do I rarely hear from? President Modena, you're on here twice, one with a video and one is a black rectangle, just by the way. Muthu Lakshmi, can you tell us some instance where you were able to distinguish? This is the modes and not me. This is my mind and not me. This is my body and not me.
Dandavat Pranam Mataji. Through Sastric knowledge and Guru Sadhu Sastra, from Guru Sadhu Sastra, I always follow Prabhupada's purport, what he is telling, what I will observe that. I will follow somehow. Yesterday we read pain and happiness and sad pain that we read. It's yesterday somebody criticized, oh, it is not for my body, it is for my mind. So my mind should not trigger. So I accept that. Through Prabhupada's purport only, I follow everything, Mataji.
Okay, but can you give me a specific example in your life? That's a wonderful, wonderful answer. But can you give me a specific example in your life where you were able to say, that's my body and that's not me, or that's my mind and that's not me, or that's the modes and it's not me? Can you give me some specific example from your life?
Specific example means we are going for kitchen service in our temple. If we are going for a kitchen service, at that time we are able to do something better than in our house. But at that, but I know it's not. I am not doing this. My body is doing with the help of Radharani's mercy. So I identify like that only, Mataji.
Okay, so when you're cooking at the temple, you're feeling that Srimati Radharani is empowering your body in ways beyond you could do yourself.
Yes. When my mind is not in good condition, if I open Bhagavatam, definitely there will be good solution for my mind through Prabhupada's purport. So I clear that doubts from that purport, Mataji. So through Sadhu Sastra only, Guru Sadhu Sastra, and that's why only one. That one only. That's why.
Okay,
only.
but when
That's
your
why
mind
only.
has doubts that you clear from Shastra, how do you know that it's the mind having the doubts and not you, the soul?
More that's not clearly. I can't be able to tell, Mataji. Sorry.
Okay, well, this is what we have to do. All right. So let's see, who else can I ask? Archana, can you tell me some instance where you knew it was the modes or your body or your mind and not you? Archana, yes.
The food is without material contamination. It is Shuddha, right? So mind only comes under the mode, and then because it is a material. So when I desire something, I feel that this is mind, and then
Can
desiring
you give me a
something because
specific example?
mind function is a feeling, thinking, willing. So when I have some desire, I feel that this is a mind is functioning, and I should not desire anything. So
Okay, so I like that. You're the one who's given me some specific example. So you said that when some desire comes into the mind, you're able to say that's not my desire, that's a desire of the mind. Am I understanding you correctly?
yes, yes, yes.
That this desire is happening in the mind, it's not actually my desire of the soul.
Yeah, I feel
Excellent.
that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Yes. Okay, let's see what we have in the chat. So we have without a regular hammering, but a regular hammering of what? Okay, Prem Manjari says we can just mentally pull at ourselves and observe what is going on. Then we'll not be pulled into all kinds of emotions regarding that situation. Excellent, although it's still a little vague. Hammering and associating with mature devotees, but I'm still not getting some specific. So we have Nardari, she says we already have some dream experience. So we can consciously try out, but again, not specific. Dedicate actions to Krishna, understanding that the body and mind are instruments. So that's kind of what she was talking about with cooking. Every time I sit in my car, I tell myself, even though once I am driving, it may seem like I am not the car and I am observing it. If I'm seeing TV or movie, I'm observing this. I'm not the person inside the scene. And it works that way with spirit. Yes, excellent, Prasant. Nilamani, by questioning, am I my head? Am I my eyes? We should conclude, yeah, but that's theoretical. I'm asking for how do you practically detach? Shakti Manta, one can observe, although the body seems to be changing, yet the person experiencing changes remains the same. Okay, that sounds to me also just like theoretical philosophy. I want practical sadhana here. Prem Manjari, actually, it's really helpful if we meditate on our spiritual connection with Guru and Krishna, we can feel detached. Okay, there we have a positive technique. My mind is accepting, rejecting by using intelligence. We can act according to what is going to be conducive to our goal or to Krishna consciousness. Okay, that's a practical technique. Learned you are not your mind, but you are better. That sounds theoretical to me. Ekanta says there are certain moments when I can feel that I want to stay calm, but somehow senses and minds carry me away. I can feel two opinions inside. This requires an attention to our inner life and regular japa chanting. Ekanta, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. So you're actually practicing this and being introspective and having some technique here. Excellent. Sitarani says, as I grow older, there are so many desires to serve Krishna, but the body has some constraints. It's easy to realize the desires are originating from me, the soul. Okay, so here we have kind of an opposite thing that Sitarani is saying, that I have a spiritual desire that my body and mind cannot facilitate, whereas it usually goes the other way. I have desires in my body and mind that I don't identify with. Okay. if the mind accepts something and rejects the same thing later, you can understand it's a mind working. You can say, okay, the mind is doing this. The mind is ever changing. Sri Radha Govinda is saying, the mind creates judgment, fears, desires, while my true self silently observes. Yes, that's a theoretical fact. How do you do that? Sri Radha Govinda is my question. When I observe it, it becomes clear. Okay. Anything that satisfies material senses is the mind. That which is connected to the reality is the real me. Well, that's a good way of making a distinction. Dvaita Krishna Prabhu, what did you want to say on this in this regard?
It's a practical thing I do. When I sit down to chant, and I know I am spirit soul, and I'm desiring to chant the holy name of Krishna. And whenever the mind tries to bring something else to me, then I will tell the mind, shut up. And I treat the mind like a passenger next to on my passenger seat. Well, I am actually wanting to go somewhere, and I'm the one who wants to chant, who wants to concentrate on the holy name. And this nonsense passenger on the side is actually bothering me all the time. So every time something comes in my mind which is not related to concentrating on hearing the holy name, I'll turn on and I'll say, shut up, because I am the soul, I'm not the mind.
Excellent. That's the kind of answer that I was looking for. So what you're actually doing. Thank you. Asit Prabhu, you have some further thoughts? Excellent.
And the idea is the soul is chanting, it's not the mind, even though the instruments are there, but actually the desire for chanting is coming from the soul. So I do not want others to tell the soul what to do. So I consider them separate entities.
Excellent. Thank you. Asit Prabhu.
Yes, Mataji. I'll give you a material example. Prabhu has given the practical spiritual example. So theoretically, I am aware, but how do I try to apply it is that, for example, if I have to reach somewhere and I'm driving, I'm late, then the mind will give many thoughts, drive fast, jump the red light, it's troubling, it's a long time. Then what I do at that time, I slow down the speed of my car. Instead of reacting and then doing very fast, and then I slow down as much as possible, just 40 and 50, and very coolly I'm just trying to manage with it. After 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I'm seeing that those thoughts are subsided. So this is how I try to hammer it several times. I just do the reverse of what my mind is suggesting me. So it makes me cool that time.
Excellent. I like that also as a very, very nice technique. Prabhupada says that we should learn the techniques of spiritual life. Excellent. All right. Oh, my dear mind, I humbly approach you and plead. Yes, okay, you're going to quote from Manashiksha. Thank you, Radha Govinda. Shri Radha Govinda. Okay, looking at text 17, Prahlad Maharaj tells his school friends how they can realize what he's talking about. What's his advice to them on how they can realize? You can look at verse 17. Prahlad Maharaj says, if you want to realize this is what you need to do. I want everyone to answer this again in the chat. Just very briefly. How does he tell them to realize this? I'd like everyone to answer this. Look at 17. All right, so why is it Prahlad and Kayadu, they're in the same place, and Prahlad remembers and Kayadu doesn't? Prahlad remembers and Kayadu doesn't. Why? Shri Radha Govinda, you wrote that just to me. She was disturbed. She identified with her body. Okay. Oh, Surita Gaur, thank you. Prahlad didn't have any material distractions. He really didn't have any material distractions, did he? Sometimes we have, the sadhus, they even do that. Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about that, like putting on, earplugs and a blindfold and sitting in a room by yourself like you're going back in the womb. She didn't get mercy. Yes. So she didn't, Ramananda Krishna, you're answering the previous question. Thank you. She didn't get the mercy of a devotee and she was distracted. Why didn't she get the mercy? Is Narada like biased? He's only giving the mercy to Prahlad. He's not giving the mercy to Kayadu. Why didn't she get the mercy? She wasn't spiritually inclined. Yeah. She wasn't spiritually inclined. She was distracted. All she's thinking about is what? When's my husband going to come back? Is my kid going to be safe? Yeah. She was distracted. So therefore she didn't get mercy because she was distracted. Have you ever been distracted? Who here has ever been distracted? Me. Anyone who's ever been distracted? Physically, raise your hand. You ever been distracted in a class? I'm going to take view of everybody. The whole gallery. All right. Any of you who've ever been distracted in a Shastra class, please physically raise your hand if you've ever been distracted in a Shastra class. Any of you who don't raise your hand, you're going to take over the class and teach the rest of the class because you're better than me. Any of you ever been distracted in a class? And when you were distracted, did you get much mercy out of the class? No, you didn't get anything out of it. And afterwards, if someone said to you, what was the class about? What happened? You're like, I don't know. Have you ever read Prabhupada's books? You sat down and read, and when you closed the book, you didn't remember what you read. Who's that happened to? Yeah. And did we get any mercy out of our reading? Very little. Who's ever been distracted in a kirtan? Anybody ever been distracted in a kirtan? Me. You ever been distracted in a kirtan? Yes. Then you might as well not have been in the kirtan practically. Who led the kirtan? I don't know. Sometimes people come up to me after my classes and they say, Urmila, that was a great class. And I'm really awful, you know. And I'll say, oh, really? What did you like? I don't know. It was a great class. What's something specific that you liked? I don't know. Can't remember. Can you, one thing? No, nothing. So Kayadu's distracted. She's with Narada Muni. She could become a pure devotee, and she's just distracted. So she doesn't get the mercy. It's there. It's not that Narada's like prejudiced. I'm not going to give her any mercy. All right. Maybe the class can be too exalted for some. We're going to blame the class for our distractions. Even if the classes are exalted. You can always get something out of it.
Is it also possible that she was a lot more materially conditioned, right? Compared to Prahlad, I guess, in his state, and just because of that material conditioning, she's not able to benefit so much from that spiritual transcendental knowledge that's being given there.
That could be. There's one lecture where Prabhupada said about Prahlad Maharaj that virtually demoniac blood flowed in his veins. So, Prahlad Maharaj, I know there's some stories in some Puranas about Prahlad having some far out conception, but generally, it's at least in the Bhagavatam, that's not described. And Prahlad Maharaj was biologically, physiologically, he had the nature of a demon. But somehow or other, he had faith. And yeah, in the womb, he wasn't so distracted. And you're saying it's interesting that she did not appreciate Narada. She felt peaceful and protected there. She didn't have any fear. And she was just happy with that. Yes. One time Prabhupada was asked, can you make it more advancement living in a temple or being in a temple? And Prabhupada says, that depends on whether or not your mind is on another subject matter. So, attention.
So, you know,
Desire.
the
Okay.
faith, I was
Yeah.
thinking, faith Prahlad Maharaj had 5-year-old kid in his, and what he had heard in the womb, that he faced death. His father is ready to kill him.
Yes.
But this boy is stuck with the opinion, with his opinion. No, this is what has to be done. And he did not listen. He was not wavered by any fear techniques. He didn't give up. It's okay for now. Okay, fine. I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to keep thinking something else. But he did not compromise at all.
And he was
Really?
completely fixed. He was
Yes.
completely fixed in hearing Narada, and he was completely fixed in dealing with his father. And of course, this brings up another question. So, is Prahlad already a pure devotee before Narada instructs him? This is also a real question, and I don't know of any clear answer to this question. Because Prahlad Maharaj attributes his bhakti entirely to Narada Muni's instruction, 100%. But Narada Muni certifies Prahlad as being a pure devotee before he instructs him. And this seemingly incompatible situation has always been a question for me. Prahlad is sometimes identified as a Nityasiddha, but Nityasiddha can also mean, by the way, someone who's Krishna conscious from the beginning of their lifetime, not necessarily someone who was never a conditioned soul. Also, there are stories in some Puranas about how Prahlad did some service at a Nrsimha temple on Nrsimha Chaturdashi or on Ekadasi. I have a lot of skepticism about those kind of stories, as I talked about the other day, about really being careful about stories in Shastra that are not quoted by our acharyas or do not have commentaries that show that those Shastras were actually bona fide. So I see this as kind of a question mark. We know with Narada himself, he talks about his previous life as a Gandharva. Then he talks about how he met the Bhakti Vedantas and became a devotee in their association. And so then in the next lifetime of Lord Brahma, he appears already as a pure devotee, and how that happened to him through sadhana in another life. With Prahlad Maharaj, again, to me, this is a question mark. Was Narada Muni saying Prahlad is already a great devotee, you can't kill him, because he knew that Prahlad was receptive from another life? Or was Prahlad already on this platform before Narada instructed him? And my answer to this is, I don't know. It's a good question. It's a question to which...
He said, the verse is Maha-Bhagavato Mahan. That this person is a Maha-Bhagavat. And you won't be, Indians a great devotee, powerful servant, therefore you will not be able to kill him.
Correct. So it sounds like he's already a Mahabhagavat before Narada instruction.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. However, Srila Rupa Goswami attributes Prahlad's devotion to Narada's instruction. It's not only that Prahlad does that. So you can't even just say, well, it's just Prahlad's humility. Srila Rupa Goswami definitely. When Srila Rupa Goswami's giving examples of Kripa Siddhi, he gives an example of Prahlad Maharaj. So, yeah, I don't know.
Mataji, one thing.
Yes, Ratnam, yes.
Yes. If he is not a pure devotee, before his birth, how can Narada can come and instruct him? And if it's a Shakti Vesh avatar, then it takes time. then later stage they'll come and meet. That's fine. It's avatar. But in case of pure devotee only, that Narada comes and meet him before his birth itself. That's what I'm thinking. It's from otherwise how if it's not a pure devotee, why he should come?
Pure devotees meet non-devotee. Narada has lots of disciples who are, I mean, Dhruva wasn't a pure devotee. Dhruva's given as the example of a neophyte in the beginning. Migrari certainly was not a pure devotee. He wasn't even civilized. So
Yeah.
Narada Narada has lots of really far out disciples all over the place. I mean, so many of the great personalities in our Shastra are Narada's disciples, and a lot of them are not already pure devotees. So
I tend to think more in that direction because, I mean, like the example of Mrigari, you know, he's a super excellent, I don't know, superlative spiritual master. He can change anyone.
yes, generally speaking, this pastime is explained like that Prahlad became a pure devotee because of Narada's instructions. That's the way Srila Rupa Goswami explains it. That's the way Prahlad himself explains it. But then the question is, why is Narada saying this before Ekanta?
Hare Krishna. Maybe it's like Srila Prabhupada was saying long before the ISKCON was actually spread in the world. He already said that I have thousands of disciples, I have thousands of temples in the West, like foreseeing that it will really happen. Although at that moment there was none. And he registered ISKCON very early. Also, although there were no actual ground for that.
That seems to me like a very reasonable answer. I mean, Prabhupada sometimes also said that his Guru Maharaj had sent his disciples to help him. So, although I would be surprised if any of his disciples would say that we had our Krishna consciousness before meeting Srila Prabhupada. So, that's there. Okay. Let's see, we don't have a whole lot of time. There's so many things here. Just something I already mentioned it, but I'll just mention it again. I don't know if we have really time to discuss it. But I really like the idea that Kayadu's not scared in the ashram. Even she's not scared of Narada. She's not scared that Narada is going to exploit her, and that it's important for saintly men to act in such a way that women are going to feel safe around them. So, and should we imitate Narada in our dealing with the opposite sex? No. Bad idea. Don't think, well, Narada did it, I can do it. 2 pending questions yesterday. I know, but today I've got so much stuff, Asi Prabhu. I don't know if I'll get to them. I don't even know if I'm going to get to everything that I want to talk about. Okay. Now, Prabhupada does say, I'm going to put this question here in the chat. This is kind of going the opposite direction of what I just asked. Oops. I send it just to Radha Govinda. Okay, let me send it to everybody. So Prabhupada says that the Acharya is not an ordinary person. This is in his purport to text 14. That great personalities can violate ordinary injunctions without becoming deviated. All right, let's look at it from the opposite direction. So he's telling us not to imitate Narada. Don't do it, he says. Don't think I'm going to be alone with a member of the opposite sex in a secluded place and I'm going to be Narada. Don't do that. And then he says great acharyas can't be judged even if they do things that seem wrong. That sounds scary to me. That sounds like an open door for people to be criminal and abusive. How are we going to understand this in ISKCON? Who is a great acharya? Okay. In ISKCON? Well, I hope we have some great acharyas in ISKCON. Okay. Okay, for spiritual practice, not for personal gain. All right, that nobody should think I'm a great acharya and I can violate this. What do we do if we see somebody violating these things and we're told, oh, don't say anything, they're a great acharya? Has this happened? Yes. What should we do? Yes. What should we do if we're told to ignore improper behavior of leaders? Inform superior, speak to someone, speak in confidence. Okay, good. If you see something, say something. Report it, consult superiors. It seems that such great acharyas are only in the past. See, I don't think so. I think we have lots of great acharyas presently in our Hare Krishna movement. But generally, great acharyas are not going to externally violate this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that acharyas who afforded to behave like this, like Ramananda Rai, for example, nowadays, I don't think any guru would behave like that.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. They shouldn't generally. Yes. Okay. Excellent. All right. And let's see any others that I really wanted to bring out. I talked about it already, but the fact that these demons just abandon their wives and kids really bothers me. It really bugs me. You know, materialistic people don't do that generally. And we see demons though. You've really got to be demoniac to do that. Just I want to just make that point again, that you really got to be demoniac. Then when there's danger, you just leave the people you're supposed to be protecting and just think about yourself. Or we have Kamsa, who when he's in danger, he tries to kill the person he's protecting. So if there's danger, we should still be protecting others. We shouldn't just be thinking about ourselves. All right, I think I'll hit one last thing and then I can take some questions from yesterday. I'm going to take a really hard thing. So, women in bhakti from verses 16 and 17. Anyone's thoughts about women and bhakti? Kali Yuga is symptomatic of protectors turning into abusers. Indeed. Indeed, on every level, isn't it? The government is supposed to protect the citizens. They exploit the citizens. Employers are supposed to protect employees. They exploit the employees. Husbands are supposed to protect wives. They exploit their wives. The parents are supposed to protect children. The teachers, the parents, they exploit them. And so therefore, there's a rebellion against authority. And, you know, to blame those who are rebelling against authority, you should submit to authority when the authorities have become abusers rather than protectors, is not reasonable. All right, thank you. Let's go back to about women in bhakti. Any thoughts on this? Yes, this is an explosive, controversial topic. Oh, okay. How women and others considered socially or intellectually less advanced can surpass those with material qualifications through pure devotion. Wow, Sri Radha Govinda, I like that. Anybody else have any thoughts? You can raise your hand or in the chat as you like. They refer to women and say people of races in a particular way, and this will not be upheld by hermeneutics, true at all times. Okay, it's not, in other words, it's not a Siddhantic statement. Bhakti is independent of gender. Generally, Prahlad says that women are more inclined to devotion. Yes, he does say that. Okay, well, what about the heavy negative things he says in 16? Devotional service is best. Women are also not their body. Ha ha. Imagine that. A strong desire. Yes, okay. Excellent. Yes, Prabhupada says that in verse 3 of Teachings of Queen Kunti, that women are more inclined toward religion. He also mentions that in a number of other places, that women have a natural inclination to surrender to the Lord. Have a natural kind of intelligence to surrender to the Lord. We're never 100% man or 100% woman. They're referring to, oh, this is interesting, percent. They're referring to qualities. We have a blend, but this can be used. That's interesting perspective. By practice, anyone can understand. Yeah. So what I hear he's saying is, Kayadu was having the typical concerns of a woman. My husband and my child. And you could talk about that as the typical concerns of a man. My wife and my kids. Right? Prahlad Maharaj has already condemned the men that all they think about is their wife and kids, right? Right? Yes? 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 I can see all of you. Yes, you can nod your head. Yes? Did Prahlad Maharaj already condemn that? Men who are just led around by a woman and all they think about is their wife and kids and all they think about is their money. Did he already talk about this? Yes. So if one is thinking I'm a man, or if one is thinking I'm a woman, then I'm just thinking about my husband and my kid. That's all she's thinking about. And so Narada Muni is talking about the soul and God and the processes of bhakti, and she's not hearing it. But Prahlad Maharaj says, it's interesting. Prahlad says she didn't remember because she was a woman. And then he turns around and says, but I don't, because the kids might think, oh, well, we're kids. We're less qualified than women. So if she didn't remember because she's a woman, then where does that leave us? And then Prahlad says, no. Children, women, everybody can understand. So if we're thinking, yes, I definitely would agree with you, Ekanta, that most philosophical people, that at least in my very anecdotal experience, most highly philosophical people I run into are men. And that's been a kind of lonely place for me my whole life as a very philosophically inclined woman. Yes. But if you transcend that and you're like, but this is not just who I am. Yes, this is not just who I am. Then you're no longer going to be constrained by whatever bodily situation you have. But this is a problem for all of us, isn't it? Right? We're in the kirtan and we're meditating on the holy name and we're seeing the deity, and then our mind says, you have to do this for your kids in an hour. And the mind goes to that. Right? And we have to say, I'm not this mind. Yes, Neelamani.
Just a thought, Mataji. So clearly the material body can have a male, female designation, but the soul, the Atma, we understand that it doesn't, but in terms of its eternal identity, the soul could also have a male and female designation, no?
Yeah, but it can have more than one. Do you know that? Do you know there are jivas who are simultaneously males with Lord Chaitanya and females with Krishna?
Interesting.
Right? Like I'm just reading Chaitanya Charitamrita again. And I was just finished the chapter about all the branches of the Chaitanya tree, where it's, mentioned that this man in Chaitanya Leela is such and such gopi in Krishna Leela. And those Leelas are happening simultaneously. So the jiva is expanded, and the jiva is a female and is experiencing both those Leelas and both those forms simultaneously. Don't ask me how that works, because I don't know. But I'm excited to find out.
No, I mean, that's the kind of case where the Goswamis were, they were manjaris of various kinds, right? So in
Yeah,
that
well, there
case,
you go.
you're saying the Atma has a female designation, but it can occupy a male material body, you know. So still,
Yeah, that's true. But still, our eternal spiritual form, first of all, is not exactly gendered biologically.
Hmm.
Our spiritual body is not gendered in terms of reproduction. There's not some biological reproductive thing going on with spiritual bodies. So the soul is not gendered in that sense at all. But as far as Leela, we can take a multiplicity of forms. Prabhupada says the liberated jiva can also expand. So the liberated jiva can have a multiplicity of forms simultaneously. You have Arjuna, who can expand with Krishna simultaneously. He can be Nara with Nara Narayan, who's having the Varna of a Brahmana, and then he can be Arjuna, who has the form of the Varna of a Kshatriya. And you have Uddhava, who also has a form as grass, as a creeper in Vrindavan. The Pandavas also have forms as trees around Shamakund. So you can have all, I mean, I used to want to do that when I was a kid. Like when I was in school, I was thinking, I wish I could expand myself and be at the beach also. Like sit here in the class so that I'm learning what I'm supposed to learn. And I could also be at the beach and do that at the same time. I had that desire. Okay, we just have a few minutes. We had 2 questions from yesterday that I didn't get to, and I didn't even get a chance to really look at what they were because I had to go into town yesterday. But we have time for one of them. So one of the people who had a question yesterday, if you can bring that up now, if you remember your question. Or if not, does anyone else have a question on anything we discussed today? Abhirupa Malti, yes. What would you like to bring up?
Mine is just very silly question.
Okay.
Hiranyakashipu went for austerity. He did austerity for about 36,000 years. So it means Prahlad Maharaj was inside the womb for 36,000 years.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are not humans. They're on higher planets and they don't have the same kind of bodies that we have. So we also have Diti did this. Diti actually held Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha within her womb for 100 demigod years. And then we have like Devahuti, she had a very fast pregnancy and then she gave birth and her children just woof, grew up. They didn't go through some kind of childhood. So they have a different type of body. I mean, we even have Kasyapa has wives who give birth to beings that are a different species than themselves. They give birth to birds and snakes. So it's, yeah, they're Hiranyakashipu, Kayadu, they're not Earth. They're not on Earth. They don't have human bodies. And so what's happening with them biologically is quite different. Yes, Ekant.
Also, excuse me for one small question. Is this austerity that Hiranyakashipu was performing is the one after which he got benedictions from Brahma?
Correct.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to bring anything up?
As I mentioned earlier, are the pains and pleasures experienced by us, are they at the mind level or soul level?
Completely mind.
Mental.
Completely.
So then why, so when we say Ichha Dvesha Mutena, the soul has Ichha, soul has desires. So it's the desire of the soul exhibited through intelligence, and mind. So, but why, I mean, But where is soul coming in here? No? What is soul's?
Oh, great. What a great question. So let's say you're reading a book or you're watching, you're watching a TV show or movie, you're reading a book, and you identify with the characters in that story. Srila Rupa Goswami talks about this in the fifth wave of the Southern Ocean. So you're identifying with those characters and you feel their desires as if they were yours. The character in the story is in love with somebody. The character in the story wants to get something, and you feel as if they're your desires. So when the character achieves that, you feel that you've achieved something. And when the character doesn't achieve it, you feel disappointed. So those are not your desires at all. You don't have any desire to be in love with the equally fictitious person in the story at all. You have some desire that's causing you to read the book or watch the drama. Now, your desire may be to forget that your boss is mad at you, or to forget that you owe money on your car that you don't know how you're going to pay, or you may have that desire. You have some desire that is inducing you to be absorbed in this narrative, but you don't have the desires of the narrative. So the body has desires. The body there's biological things in the body, especially for eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. That's actually part of the physical body. And then the mind is a machine that's presenting all these different thoughts and desires in front of us. You can think of it kind of like, okay, let's say you go onto an internet shopping site like Amazon or something, and it presents to you, would you like to buy this? Would you like to buy this? Would you like to buy this? And if you scroll, it'll keep presenting things, and they try to curate what what you've bought before and something similar, with the hope that you'll grab it and say, that's what I want. Or you're walking down the street in a shopping area and there's things in the windows. They're put there so that, oh, I want that. But you may not have had the desire for those things before they were presented, correct? Correct? We've had that experience. So you might not even have known that such a thing was a possibility. Like you didn't even know that such a thing existed. And then the shop, whether it's an online or physical, it presents it to you. Oh yeah, I want that. So the mind is like that. It's constantly putting thoughts, feelings, and desires in front of the soul that feel like they're ours, but they're not. The soul's desire is to forget that God exists, and to forget that we're part of God, and to forget that we're meant to serve him. That's our desire that we're manifesting. And so, if you think of it like if a child goes to the parent and says, I want to play. I want to play. And so you have a toy, unless you're extremely poor, you have a toy closet or a toy chest or something. And you take your child in front of, here are the toys. What would you like to play with? And then the child takes the toy, and then the child becomes absorbed in that toy. And they may even identify with the toy. I'm a whatever, I'm a dinosaur, I'm a warrior, I'm a whatever, I'm a fashion model, or whatever they pick up. So the soul's desire is to forget Krishna. Therefore, Krishna provides this machine that puts, oh, would you like to forget Krishna like this? What about forgetting Krishna like this? What about forgetting him like this? Would you like to forget him like this? Or what about like this? And it can be very subtle. Like I say, you're in a kirtan, and all of a sudden the mind goes, don't you have to worry about that project you have to do later? It's so fascinating to me. Like you're just meditating on the deities, you're meditating on the mantra, and the mind goes, what about this? This is something you have to think about. And you better think about it right now. You better do this right now. Come on, over here, over here, over here, over here, over here, over here. Yeah. Now, when the soul starts awakening a desire to serve Krishna, and we start associating with devotees and we start hearing the Shastras, then the mind, which is also part of Krishna's energy, can start to be our friend by putting up things about the Shastra and devotees and service. But if we're mixed, like most of us are, the mind puts up both things. Yes? Come in. All right. Any mistakes here I have, please ignore them. And anything good here is coming from Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas, and certainly not from me. Hare Krishna.